With this episode, Paul McCartney's music is now entering its fifth decade. In the 1960s, there were 13 albums that contained Paul McCartney's music. In the 1970s, there were 18 albums. In the 1980s, there were 11 albums. And in the 1990s, there were 15 albums of Paul McCartney music. So now we start a new millennium. And we're going to look at the music of Paul McCartney that he made starting in the year 2000. Now, as before, there is so much music. Again, I'll break it into two episodes. This one will cover his music from the year 2000 through 2005. So are you ready? Let's drop the needle. At the start of this decade, Paul is asked by his friend Peter Blake to help him in recording a musical background for an art exhibit that Blake is going to do in England. Now, you might remember Peter Blake. He is the artist who created the Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band cover. So Paul thinks, yeah, this will be cool to create a sound environment that will go with that art exhibit. So he gets back together with Youth and with Super Furry Animals, and he records an album which is called Liverpool Sound Collage. And in it, he does all kinds of avant-garde stuff, electronic music, snippets of people on the street, snippets of Beatles songs. It's all thrown together in this collage. There are 5 tracks. There's Plastic Beetle, featuring Paul and the Beatles, Peter Blake 2000, featuring Super Furry Animals and the Beatles, Real Gone Dub, made in the manifest in the vortex of the eternal now, featuring Youth, Made Up, Paul and the Beatles, and Free Now, Paul and the Beatles and the Super Furry Animals. Now, to say this is an eclectic album, it certainly is. And you know, Paul McCartney has always thought of himself as an avant-garde artist. In fact, he says that when he was single and living in London during the height of Beatlemania, he was the guy going to all of these art shows and going to all this music shows and absorbing all the avant-garde music, whereas everybody thinks John Lennon was way out there. But at that time, according to Paul, John was way out there at his home out in the suburbs. And then in November of 2000, Apple releases a Beatle compilation album, which is simply called One. And it only contains all of the #1 singles that the Beatles ever had. And it is a worldwide smash hit. One is truly #1. Inspired by the Beatles' One, in May of 2001, Paul decides, maybe it'd be a good idea to do a compilation of Wings music. And so he releases a double album, a double CD, called Wingspan. And the first disc is Hits, and the second disc is History. The album is #2 in the US and 5 in the UK. Remember, that year is 2001. And on that fateful day in New York City, Paul is sitting on an airplane at an airport in New York where he watches those terrorist jets slam into the World Trade Center. And this prompts him to do a benefit concert for New York City. Now, on a side note, on September 11th, I was actually working in Dubai, and I was flying to Cairo. And when I landed in Cairo, my phone rang, and they said, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm on my way to the hotel." "Oh my God, drop down. Don't look out the windows. Don't talk to anybody. Don't do anything. When you get in the hotel, call us." And I'm going, what is going on? And they're talking about planes hitting the World Trade Center and all of that. So I was half a world away when it happened. But I have to tell you, even being in an Arab country at that time, everybody was really concerned, and particularly for my safety, being an American. Right after that, he decides to record an album. And the album is called Driving Rain. Now, the cover is interesting for a couple of points. One, on the website, they make a big point that it was shot by a handheld Casio phone. And that's, I guess, true. But the other thing you got to remember about Paul McCartney is he's got a little bit of a risque sense of humor. And when he can get away with something, he will. Like way back when the Beatles recorded the song Girl, and in the background instead of going dit, 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 they went tit, 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 tit. Well, on this cover, if you look at it, it's basically Paul leaning against the glass, and I presume that's in a urinal, which would be part of that humor that I'm talking about. Anyway, the album is called Driving Rain, and it's a double album. On the tracks, I like From a Lover to a Friend, She's Given Up Talking, Driving Rain, Tiny Bubble, Spinning on an Axis, Heather, which is about his new love in his life, Heather, Back in the Sunshine Again, written with his son James, and Riding into Jaipur. I really like that song. And then there's the last-minute edition of Freedom, the song Paul wrote in response to the September 11th attacks. The album got good reviews, but it didn't sell all that well. It stalled at 46 in the UK, making it his lowest-selling album in the UK. In the US, it hit 26. After the album, Paul decides to go on tour, and he's got a new band with him now. On guitar, he's got Rusty Anderson and Brian Ray. Then his old friend Paul Wiggins is on keyboards, and Abe Laberell Jr. on drums. The tour was recorded, and in 2002 they released a double album called Back in the U.S. On the tour, Paul performs a number of Beatles songs, and so they're on this album. But he decides to change the songwriting credit for the songs that he is singing lead on, and he wrote most of. He wants to change the traditional credit from Lennon-McCartney to make it McCartney-Lennon. Well, this upsets many of his fans, and it certainly upsets Yoko Ono, who threatens to sue him. And even Ringo Starr, who's the most easygoing of all the Beatles, said that he thought Paul's action was pretty underhanded. The album Back in the U.S. was only released in the U.S. and Japan. But then a couple of months later, there's an album that comes out which is called Back in the World, and it includes tracks that are not on the U.S. release. In 2002, Paul marries Heather Mills, and then the following year they welcome a daughter, Beatrice Milley. In 2003, Paul finally realizes something that's been bothering him since the breakup of the Beatles, and that is, in Paul's opinion, the abomination that Phil Spector made of the Let It Be album. So in 2003, Paul releases Let It Be Naked. And basically what this is this is the Let It Be album without Phil Spector's embellishments, without the strings and the female chorus and all the stuff that drove McCartney up the wall. Also, 2 tracks on the Spector album, Dig It and Maggie May, are replaced with Don't Let Me Down. And Ringo has even said that he does prefer this version to the Spector version. But then Ringo's always a nice guy. In 2004, when Paul's on tour, he has an opening act, which is a DJ, Roy Kerr, who's known as Freelance Hellraiser. And he remixes a number of McCartney songs to play as the audience is filling the arenas. And then Paul came out and did his gig. Well, he was so impressed with what the DJ was doing that he decides the two of them should get together and make an album. And the album is called Twin Freaks. This is a double album released in 2005. I like a number of the tracks on here, particularly Dark Room, Live and Let Die, Temporary Secretary, Oh Woman, Oh Why, and the amazing, always, Maybe I'm Amazed. Yes, they're familiar songs, but not so on this album. Then in July of 2005, he plays at Live 8, singing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Helter Skelter, The Long and Winding Road, and Drive My Car. Then at the end of 2005, Paul releases an album, which will be the last album he does for the first half of the decade, and the last album we'll talk about in this episode. And for it, he goes back to his backyard. Well, not really, but if you look at the cover, you see him sitting in the backyard of his house when he was a kid, and the photograph was taken by his brother, Mike McCartney. The album is called Chaos and Creation in the Backyard, and Paul plays most of the instruments. I like Jenny Wren, Friends to Go, English Tea, A Certain Softness, Writing to Vanity Fair, Promise to You Girl, This Never Happened Before, and I've Only Got Two Hands. Critics liked the record. It went to number 10 in the UK and 6 in the US. Now, as usual, I've created a Spotify playlist where you can listen to some of the songs that I've talked about in this episode. And here's the link, and I'll also put it in the comments below. So between 2000 and 2005, Paul's music comes out on 9 albums. We see him doing everything from avant-garde sound collages to Beatles' greatest hits, to remixing Let It Be, to doing his own albums, to putting out a Wings retrospective. This guy is incredibly busy, and wait till you see what he does between the years of 2005 and the end of that decade. Thanks for watching. Keep it rocking.
If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.